No activity more characterizes the American spirit than invention. Practical ingenuity has enabled Americans of every generation to catapult this nation from its agricultural launching pad into a technical superpower engaged in the exploration of space. In no period of our history were the spirit and impact of invention greater than in the years 1830 to 1925, years that witnessed the invention of the incandescent light, the radio, the airplane, and the gasoline-powered automobile. This 95-year period has been dubbed by historians as the age of heroic invention. But the history of American technology is incomplete without acknowledging the contributions of African-American inventors. Like Garrett Augustus Morgan, inventor of a gas mask and the first trifunctional traffic signal. The legend of Garrett Morgan is one of America's greatest stories of human triumph over nearly insurmountable odds during an ignominious and tumultuous period of American history. From their first arrival in America, both as slaves and as freedmen after emancipation, blacks contributed more to the development of this nation than just picking cotton and tobacco. They designed and fabricated farm implements, wagons, ships, bridges, and they developed medical procedures, anything that was needed. Many of these blacks, like Garrett Morgan, were in fact well equipped to be inventors and gave credence to the old axiom that necessity is the mother of invention.
That besides being an important figure in history, that he was an important figure as a role model for what a black man is all about. Having faith in himself, having faith in his dream, and having a plan and carrying that plan out to the fullest degree of his capacity.
One of Jefferson Davis's first deeds after he became president of the Confederate States was the framing of the Confederate Patent Act. Section 50 of the act prevented slaves from holding patents in their own name.
There were others who did the same thing, but it is true that in some instances, whatever the black man thought about was assumed to be the property of the owner. And this could be certified in court because according to the Constitution pre-slavery, not only was the black man the property of his owner, but everything he did and everything he produced was also the property, and there was no about it. And to some extent that was true, but in many instances it was not, because there were a lot of freemen at that time who were doing things.
When the Civil War ended, and as America geared up for the Industrial Revolution, African Americans in the South had a virtual monopoly on the skilled crafts, such as carpentry, masonry, metalworking, carriage making, and railroad construction. It was into this milieu that Garrett A. Morgan was born on March 4th, 1877, in a small rustic hamlet called Claysville in Bourbon County, near Paris, Kentucky. Garrett's mother, Eliza Reed, was the daughter of Claysville's Reverend Garrett Reed, and his father, Sidney Morgan, a former slave, was the son of Confederate Colonel John Hunt Morgan of Morgan's Raiders. Sidney was freed by Union soldiers who captured and killed the colonel after one of his many daring raids throughout Ohio during the Civil War. Sidney and Eliza had 11 children, and Garrett was the 7th born. In 1893, at the age of 16, armed with only a 6th grade education, young Garrett hopped a freight train and left Paris, Kentucky, bound for Cincinnati, Ohio. For him, the North had more to offer a young black man than life under the strict ethnic codes of the antebellum South. Along the way, he found work as a handyman for a rich landowner. He developed a passion for the mechanical and learned a number of trades that would later prove useful in his life. He even hired tutors when he had money to continue his education. In leaving Kentucky, Morgan and many others like him took part in what has been called the most important event in post-Civil War history, the Great Migration. Thousands of African Americans bid Old Dixie farewell and headed for the industrial complexes of the North and the Midwest, hoping that they and their children might share in the American dream. The majority of African American masses, the agricultural proletariat, were willing to cast their lot and stake their dreams with the change America was making from an agricultural to an industrial-based society. They voted with their feet and headed north. No doubt, Garrett A. Morgan shared this dream. Seeing no future for himself in Cincinnati, Morgan again caught a freight train bound for Cleveland, Ohio, one of the few areas in the nation where the abolitionist tradition still lingered, although ever so slightly.
Is train going to Cleveland?
Yeah, Cleveland.
Much obliged. Garrett Morgan.
Walter Wills.
On the ride to Cleveland, Garrett met Mr. Walter Wills, and they became friends for life. Mr. Wills became a very successful Cleveland mortician and one of the few blacks to invest in any of Morgan's inventions. When Garrett and Walter Wills arrived in Cleveland around 1895, Garrett had one dime in his pocket. While he searched for work, home was any boxcar that he could find in the area of Cleveland known as the Flats. Cleveland, like the rest of the nation, had begun to turn its back on the plight of African American citizens.
Even here, there's the same bar when it comes to employment. We don't employ niggers here. That's what I got over and over after I was ready to do first-class work.
Garrett Morgan, Cleveland, Ohio, 1895. Morgan eventually found a job at Root and McBride, a dry goods store, sweeping floors for $5 per week. From there, he moved on to H. Black Company, and then moved on to the L.N. Gross Company. Both firms manufactured ladies' garments. His new job at the Gross Company gave him an opportunity to display his mechanical aptitude and inventive talents, and before long, Morgan became a skilled machine adjuster and repairman. During this time, he developed many devices that enhanced the performance of commercial sewing machines. Morgan created his very first invention for these machines, a friction clutch drive device which kept the drive belts adjusted and at the proper tension. This device improved the efficiency and prolonged the life of these machines and saved the company money. He sold this first invention to Mr. L.N. Gross, the owner of Gross Company, for $150. It was during his tenure at Gross that Morgan met and fell in love with Mary Ann Hassick, a bohemian seamstress.
Miss Mary, no matter how beautiful it gets outside, there's always more sunshine in here.
Oh, Mr. Morgan.
Hey, boy. Get away from her.
Why?
You're keeping them from working. And you know you colored boys aren't supposed to be talking with our white women.
First of all, I am a man. And don't you ever tell me who I can or cannot talk to.
It was clear America was not ready for interracial relationships, but Mary and Garrett were both independent-minded people.
And he turned around, went to the personnel company, and resigned. And because he was a resourceful and prudent man, he had saved up money. And the next day, he went around in the general area and found a place to lease and started the first black-owned company for machine repair in this city.
Around 1907, Morgan opened a sewing machine repair shop at the corner of Cleveland's Bank and St. Clair Streets. That following year, he married Mary Hassick, despite strong opposition from both families.
Both her family and his family were totally against the marriage. In fact, her family disowned her for quite a lengthy period of time until my grandfather started becoming successful. Many of her family members would not even speak, and she wasn't welcome in their homes.
Remember, this was way back I'll say as far back as 1910. And mixed marriages sometimes ended in violence. We knew that she was white, but she reacted as if, you know, she was black and accepted all of us, and we accepted her. Her family did not accept the marriage.
The marriage would last for 55 years and bear 3 sons, John Pierpont Morgan, Garrett Augustus Morgan, Jr., and Cosmo Henry Morgan. Mary's seamstress and business skills proved a valuable asset, and in 1909, the Morgans opened a clothing shop in their new home that manufactured dresses, suits, and coats. The shop employed 32 workers and was located in an all-white neighborhood in the heart of Cleveland's garment district. Always looking to improve his manufacturing process, Morgan was constantly experimenting with new techniques. One day, while working in his home lab, Morgan would make an interesting discovery.
What are you working on now?
I'm trying to find a lubricant to keep sewing machine needles from scorching the cloth.
Come on, dinner's ready.
In just a moment, dear.
It's time to take a break, Garrett.
All right, dear.
After dinner, he returned to discover that the solution had straightened the nap of the wiry cloth. Morgan decided to experiment further by trying the solution on his Airedale Towser, whose wiry hair was also straightened. Continuing his research, he then tried the chemical solution on his own hair, which was straightened as well, and thus was born one of the first hair relaxers for African American men. He dubbed the solution Morgan's Hair Refiner Cream. The hair refiner was technically a hair straightener, which is commonly called a relaxer or a permanent today. Immediately seeing the business potential of the chemical solution, Morgan established the G.A. Morgan Hair Refining Company in 1913. The company produced and sold a full line of hair care products, including a hair grower, a hair pressing gloss, a bleach-in ointment, and a pomade. Morgan invented a unique hair pressing comb with movable teeth, which he patented also. Morgan traveled widely throughout the United States, Canada, and Mexico, selling his hair care products. Sometimes, his eldest son would accompany his father on these sales trips. If the customer had no money, Morgan would accept chickens, vegetables, and fruit in exchange for his products.
He purchased a bus, had all the seats taken out, had an icebox put in, beds put in, a couch put in, and an organ put in, so that my Uncle John could play the organ while they would travel throughout the country, in particular to the South, and they would be entertained. Also, the organ made a loud enough noise that when they came into town, he would play the organ, and people were interested to hear where the music was come from, and he would park the bus and get out and give his spiel about his products. Then he would go to the drugstores and all the, in the community, and also to the barber shops, and give demonstrations on how to use the product. So he was very, very innovative and very creative.
Always the consummate salesman, it was reported that in a Pittsburgh barbershop, Morgan dramatically demonstrated the safety of one of his liquid hair preparations to potential customers.
Well, Garrett Morgan would visit our store maybe twice a year in his effort to market and supply some of the cosmetics that he made. And one of the cosmetics was Morgan's hair straightener, which he would come to try to sell people in the drugstore. But next to the drugstore was a popular barbershop called Sugar Gray's. And this would be the place where Morgan would go over and demonstrate his hair straightener to any and all who would be willing to take the time to do that. Now, I remember one incident which I remember to this day, where Morgan came into town and came into the drugstore, and he was selling something called Morgan's Hair Stain, which was a black dye that could be used to reduce the gray in a person's hair. And he went next door as usual, and to demonstrate to all who would listen to him how efficacious his product was. And the thing that I remember more than anything else is when he got through telling about his product, he dramatically drank some of it to prove that it was non-toxic and it was vegetable source and no one had to worry about any of the toxins affecting their skins.
Gentlemen, I will drink it. I will prove to you that my products are all natural, formulated from pure vegetable dyes.
I can't believe he did that.
By using these dramatic techniques, by these demonstrations, he would create a demand for his product, because it wouldn't be long after he left Suge Ray's at the barbershop next to the pharmacy that someone for the next 2 or 3 days or a week or 10 days after that would come in requesting his product. So we had to stock his cosmetics.
Eventually, Morgan's hair care company grew to challenge the Madam C.J. Walker Company in sales. The company was founded by the legendary Madam C.J. Walker, a New York City laundress, before she discovered a hair straightening process for women, the Walker system, which brought her a great fortune. The success of his hair care products afforded Morgan both time and money to work on ideas for other inventions, such as a breathing apparatus that evolved into his now famous gas mask, which he called a safety hood or helmet. The hood was constructed of rubber, canvas-covered coiled filters, and mica, and was slipped over the head of the user.
He had let some gas seep in his basement, and it wasn't a real test, but it was about the best test that he could get. Then after he got through testing it down in his basement, then he opened up the windows again, because he didn't want no explosion there in the house.
Morgan's breathing device was granted a patent on October 13, 1914. Displaying the business acumen to match his inventive talents, Morgan established the National Safety Device Company. Realizing the tremendous financial potential of the breathing device, and that his race had few opportunities to enter mainstream American business, Morgan first sought investors from Cleveland's African-American population.
Mr. Morgan, how can you assure us a profit?
There's no absolute guarantee that there will be profit. But there's, as you all know, there is some suspicion that Americans will get involved in the war effort. When Americans get involved, that means that there's a greater need for the smoke helmet. If the war were to end tomorrow, the helmet still does have tremendous commercial possibilities.
Brother Morgan, how many other investors do you have that you've talked to besides ourselves?
I have spoken to quite a few. I will tell you very honestly, brother, that I would like for my own people, for colored people, to invest in this helmet. This is something that I want to do. This is an opportunity that I want to share with you. How many of you will join me?
The only black investor was Mr. Walter Wills, the man who hoboed to Cleveland with him. Seeing Cleveland's African-American citizens miss a great opportunity was a major disappointment for Morgan. The National Safety Device Company started manufacturing Morgan's gas mask as the NASDCO breathing and smoke protector. Morgan was able to retain only 49% of the firm's stock and was listed as the general manager and the only non-white officer in the firm.
He did everything himself. He determined his market. He did his own distribution. He was his own sales rep. He did the manufacturing. He even designed the labels and what he wanted the wordage to be. So he was all things for his business.
With Morgan masterminding the sales and marketing efforts, firefighting departments and mining companies across the nation were requesting demonstrations and placing orders for the new technology. It should be noted that Morgan tried to sell his invention to the Cleveland Fire Department, but they were not interested. Many of these orders were filled by the American LaFrance Fire Engine Company, one of the nation's largest suppliers of firefighting equipment, which distributed the Morgan smoke helmet via its catalogs. Morgan knew America's white business community would be reluctant to accept the product of an African-American inventor, so he developed clever ways to overcome these obstacles.
The positive thing about him was that, first of all, he was a realist. He knew the mindset of the people that he was dealing with, and he never was daunted by their racism and their negative attitude. He didn't let it weaken him, and he didn't let it make him a bitter person. Instead, he turned this frustration and anger around and used it as a dynamic force to be even more self-motivating, to be even more assertive, and also to be more covert in his ways of trying to sell and market his products.
In 1914, when Morgan traveled to New Orleans to demonstrate the effectiveness of his invention to the National Association of Fire Chiefs, he was prepared. He took a white officer of the firm who pretended to be Garrett Morgan, while Morgan himself played the role of his assistant, Big Chief Mason, a full-blooded Indian from the Walpole Reservation in Canada, so as not to be confronted with the issue of his race. Morgan's invention won an award from the fire chiefs, but he had to watch from the audience as the white business associate accepted the award for him. The fact that white America would accept the product his brilliant mind produced, but not him, was adding to his ever-increasing frustration.
Think of how degrading that must have been, you know, to be honored but have to hide that you are who you are, that you are a man capable of such an important invention and have such creative genius, but you have to hide who you are in order to get some recognition of your accomplishment just because of the color of your skin.
That same year, his safety hood won first grand prize for the simplest and best life-saving device at New York City's International Exposition of Safety and Sanitation. In addition, he used several of his gas masks from the exhibit booth to aid New York City firemen in rescuing victims of a terrible subway disaster. The mask was also put on display at the American Museum of Safety. The only other African American to exhibit at the museum had been Booker T. Washington. Despite the awards and the fact that fire departments all over the country were using the Morgan hood to save lives and property, Morgan was a relative unknown in his hometown of Cleveland. This would soon change after what was perhaps the most convincing test ever of his safety hood. This event occurred in Cleveland around 10 o'clock on the night of July 24th, 1916. While constructing a water intake tunnel 250 feet under Lake Erie to bring water to the city, sand hogs hit a pocket of natural gas. And a spark, possibly caused by a pick, triggered an explosion. The pressurized tunnel quickly filled with smoke and poisonous gases. 11 men trapped in the tunnel were killed, and 10 would-be rescuers died trying to save them. 2 rescue parties had already gone into the tunnel, but neither returned. The smoke and lethal gases prevented other rescue attempts. Rescue officials had given up hope. Then someone remembered some guy in Cleveland who had recently demonstrated a gas mask. But how would they find him?
We are doing everything we can. We've already said everything.
Somebody told him that there's a black man here in Cleveland had invented the gas mask. So then the question comes up, what black man it was? And a lot of people say, well, best way to find that out, because more than likely he belonged to some of these churches around there. So they started calling the ministers. So when they started calling the ministers and calling around, and finally one minister who wasn't his minister told him who his minister was, but told him where he could get in touch with Garrett Morgan. So they jumped in the car and ran on over there and asked him, did he have a gas mask? He says, yes. He said, well, can we see it? So he went back there and got it and brought it. So the policemen sort of looked around at each other there and saying, what fool do you think would go down in a place like this? And then said, well, you go down in the hole again? He says, I certainly will. He said, well, won't you come and go with us? Then his brother was standing there in the door, And his brother told his brother, get a couple of more of those masks there, and let's go down. And so his brother went down with him.
Mr. Morgan coming. Oh, here comes somebody now.
Mark, God, look at that.
What is that thing? Is that going to do it?
I'm Garrett Morgan. This is my brother Frank.
Hey, Mayor Davis. Can you help us? Can you get those men out?
I believe I can. I have more smoke helmets in the car, but I need some volunteers. Anyone want to go down?
I'll go. My father-in-law's down there.
Somebody else.
I'll go too.
Good. If you can get those men out, I'll take care of you for life. For life.
We're ready.
Let's go. All right.
My grandfather told me that it was a very eerie place to go down into, and that he made the decision not to wear shoes because he wanted to be able to feel with his bare feet if he were to touch any broken glass, because he knew that if he had touched this broken glass with his shoes, it could cause a spark and there would be another explosion.
A barefooted Morgan then led his brother Frank, Thomas Rummersfield, and Thomas Clancy, all equipped with his gas mask, into the tunnel. Clancy's stepfather, Gus Van Dusen, the superintendent of the Waterworks project, led an earlier rescue party that hadn't returned. Morgan led his small party deeper into the dark tunnel until they came upon several bodies, which were taken to the surface via an elevator. As a group pushed on farther into the tunnel, they then found Tom Clancy's stepfather, Superintendent Van Dusen, who was still breathing.
Hey, wait a minute. Here they come. Make way. It looks like it's Van Dusen. Looks like Van Dusen.
That one, he'll make way.
Is he alive? Oh, wait a minute.
Yeah, he's still alive.
He's still alive. Smoke on us to work.
Official accounts of the fatal disaster show that Morgan would make several more trips into the tunnel and rescue a total of 6 men. 2 would live. Officials from the U.S. Bureau of Mines stopped further rescue efforts. Ironically, local Cleveland newspaper accounts of the tragic event only mentioned Morgan and his brother Frank in passing. Their presence on the scene was not even acknowledged by official accounts and investigations of the accident. Were it not for this newspaper photo, many city officials tried to deny the fact that Garrett and brother Frank were even at the disaster site, not to mention playing a major role in rescue efforts at all.
They denied the fact that he ever went down there. And if it hadn't been to the plain dealer had taken a picture of him going down there, he probably would have never got no consideration here in Cleveland.
Thomas J. Clancy, one of the volunteers who followed the Morgan brothers into the tunnel, received a medal from the Carnegie Hero Fund Commission and $500 for his heroic efforts, while Morgan was not even considered. Years later, Clancy would downplay Morgan's rescue involvement, saying Morgan was not the outstanding figure in the rescue that he claimed to be. Citizens and organizations rallied on Morgan's behalf with petitions and letters of support to city officials. Not one of those rescued or their families ever came forth to thank the Morgan brothers, who heroically risked their lives that day beneath Lake Erie. Eventually, he did receive medals for his bravery from a Cleveland citizens group and one from the Cleveland Association of Colored Men.
This was a token of their appreciation to him for his gesture of heroism. But in no way did it compensate for the pain that was caused to him because he was denied this honor and it was given to a white man who assisted him, as opposed to him being given it as the original person who had jeopardized their life and also used his own equipment in doing so.
Years later, Garrett was able to convince the city to give Frank a grave in Highland Park Cemetery after his death in April of 1934. During World War I, Morgan's gas mask was improved upon, and soon a smaller mask, developed by another firm, emerged as the gas mask that the United States Army used to save the lives of thousands of U.S. soldiers on the battlefield. The post-war years found Garrett Morgan still busy in his dual role as entrepreneur and inventor. In 1920, concerned about the lack of coverage of African American affairs in the Cleveland newspapers, and as an advertising tool to promote his hair care products, Morgan founded the Cleveland Advocate Publishing Company. The company published the Cleveland Call paper, later to become the Cleveland Call and Post. The beginning of the 20th century saw an American mainstay lose popularity as America's love affair with the horse ended, and a new infatuation with the automobile began. As more cars, streetcars, and trucks hit the streets, traffic control soon became a major safety problem, especially in the large urban areas. One day, Morgan witnessed a terrible accident involving an automobile and a horse-drawn carriage in which a little girl was injured. It was then he decided to develop an invention to regulate the flow of traffic. Morgan experimented, and in 1922, he was granted a patent for the first folding automatic tricolor traffic signal. The Morgan traffic signal had a caution sign, as well as the basic stop-and-go signals. Morgan formed the G.A. Morgan Safety Company to distribute the traffic signal, and as usual, he skillfully developed the appropriate collateral materials to advertise and market his invention. There were other inventors working on traffic signals of every imaginable size, shape, and complexity. Some had one signal, some had two positions, stop and go, and some as many as 7 positions. But none quite addressed the problems like Morgan's signal, which simplified and solved the problem of controlling the increasing amounts of traffic on America's streets. Morgan's 3-function traffic signal could control pedestrian traffic, streetcars, and railroad traffic safely through one device. It was the embryo, the forerunner of today's electric traffic signals.
I think that every time we see a traffic signal, we see the light change, we ought to remember Garrett, or being creative enough to come through with a traffic signal that caught the attraction of the public generally. There were other people working on traffic signals at that time, but Garrett's traffic signal has survived, and his name has been associated with it more than any other single individual. I remember the story about Garrett's son, who was stopped by the policeman after having violated a traffic signal. And when he told him what his name was, he was Garrett Morgan, Jr. The policeman almost dropped his pencil and said, "I should give you 3 traffic tickets for violating your old man's traffic signal." So I'm sure that Garrett and the policeman never forgot that.
In late 1923, Morgan sold the patent outright to General Electric for the sum of $40,000. Archivists at General Electric's Hall of History Foundation say their traffic controlling signal tower, Form T16, evolved from Morgan's invention. 2 years later, General Electric installed a string of automatic traffic lights in Cleveland, Ohio, near the intersection of 9th Street and Euclid Avenue. While praising the new traffic devices, newspaper accounts of the day again failed to mention the fact that one of its own citizens, Garrett A. Morgan, invented the precursor to those traffic signals. Not finding any fulfillment and recognition for his inventions, Morgan found solace in his immediate and extended family.
He seemed to take over his father's part, and he was more or less a mother. Well, he was a male, but like mother hen and her brood. But he financially, emotionally, and wherever he was needed, he helped his family.
My grandfather placed above all else, above his business, above his accomplishments, he placed his family first. One of his sayings was, "The business does not support the family supports the business."
I would describe Father as stern, firm, really down on rules and regulations. He was the head of the household, and this was understood. There was no wavering. He was head of the household. Everything came through him. Either my way or no way. That's the way he was. But he was fair. He loved his children. He loved his family. He tried to do the best for his family, but he was still the leader.
Morgan found time to run as an independent candidate for councilman in Cleveland's 3rd District in 1931. He lost. In 1933, in keeping with America's ever-growing fascination with the automobile, Morgan invented a device for those traveling by car to cook food, utilizing the heat from the engine. Even though he was a man of many inventions, he was not immune to the devastation wrought by the Great Depression. During the Depression years, Garrett Morgan and many other Americans saw their financial well-being plummet to the depths of disaster. Morgan had always been a strong, healthy man, but in 1943, he developed glaucoma, for which he made frequent and costly trips to the Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota. But poor health and advancing age did not subdue his innate desire and instinct to invent. In 1961, at the age of 84, Morgan invented a device which automatically extinguished a cigar or cigarette.
The people who have been inventors, like Garrett Morgan, have made a tremendous contribution, especially at a time when the establishment felt that blacks had nothing to offer. And yet, we have people like Garrett who were working in very difficult circumstances, but who were creating all the time. They had difficulty getting patents, they had difficulty finding money, but they persisted.
Garrett Morgan was a unique combination of inventor, businessman, humanitarian, and hero. He had that rare ability to conceive an idea and the industry to bring that idea to fruition. As a businessman, Morgan realized that when he invented a device, he also had to invent a means of marketing and selling it too. Just think of the many lives his gas mask and traffic signal have saved in their original and present configuration, and the millions of lives they will save in the years to come in their contemporary form. Garrett A. Morgan died on the 27th of July, 1963, at the age of 86. The humanitarian, the hero, and inventor was laid to rest in Cleveland's historic Lakeview Cemetery. In honor of Garrett A. Morgan, his birthplace, the hamlet of Claysville, was officially renamed Garrett Morgan Place. The city of Cleveland renamed one of its water treatment facilities the Garrett A. Morgan Waterworks Facility. In addition, the city has a public school named in his honor, the Garrett A. Morgan Cleveland School of Science. There's also a public school in Chicago, Illinois, that bears his name. In 1991, Garrett A. Morgan was inducted into the prestigious Ohio Science and Technology Hall of Fame, along with Thomas A. Edison, Harvey S. Firestone, and the brothers Wilbur and Orville Wright.
Here's a man with just a 6th grade education. Can you imagine what he would have done if he had went on to Harvard or somewhere?
And some of these things came from just closing his eyes and using his imagination.
We don't have enough Morgans, and we should remember the Morgans that we do have.
Morgan's life as an inventor follows a pattern that we see in all great inventors, those seemingly crazy, ornery individualists by nature who dare to dream and create in their little backyard shops and garages the embryos of today's modern conveniences, technologies that we take for granted today, but that had their humble creation in yesteryear, in the active and creative minds of men like Garrett Augustus Morgan.